Oh, and one last thing is, I had a guest tell me that the Iranian strategy is an interesting theory. I want to get your thoughts on. So it's part of a broader point. So one of my guests was telling me that the Iranian strategy right now their goal is to cause so much damage to Trump himself that he loses the midterms. And because when he loses the midterms, the House and the Senate, then he's kneecapped for the rest of his term to be able to do anything against Iran. Because everyone's talking about the US going to attack Iran. Everyone's saying they're going to attack Iran after the midterms. So the Iranians, who are very astute and aware of American politics, would be looking at this and calculating, all right, the midterms are going to happen. And the midterms are happening. They look at the polls, etc., and they're like, we need to cause as much harm politically to Trump as possible. There's two ways to do that. Number one is keeping the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Energy prices goes up, and we know 70-something% of Americans consider this the most important topic when it comes to foreign policies, gas prices, according to a recent poll. So all the Iranians need to do is keep gas prices high enough that will hurt Trump in the polls enough. Now, obviously, there's a counter blockade by the Americans, so the Iranians have to take that into consideration for their economy. But if that's not enough to work, if the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz to increase energy prices is not enough to harm Trump politically, the other option would be to bait Trump back into war, drag him back into war, where they'll be able to cause him more damage, and that will hurt him in the midterms as well. So the Iranian strategy right now is, how do we harm Trump's odds of keeping the House is going to lose, of winning the Senate? Because if he loses both the House and the Senate, they're clear for this presidency, and all they need to hope for is a more logical president to come after him.
Why don't they just sit back? Trump seems to be doing enough harm to himself. He's like somebody trying to, cut his own wrists. He's not exactly embarked on some successful political strategy here. Some genius move. Boy, I'm on a pull now.
You're saying threatening to bomb Oman is not a smart strategy? It sounds like a very good strategy.
And going after South Korea, I went back and looked it up. So in 2022, the United States basically was raiding South Korean stocks of 155 millimeter missiles or artillery shells. So we ended up taking like 300,000 from them.
For Ukraine,
Yeah, for Ukraine. Screw you, you don't need those, we need them. And now Trump's insulting them.
And took the air defense batteries as well, remember?
Yeah.
During the war.
Oh, you don't need them. Those North Koreans are fine. Which is, someone posted a hilarious meme that, in fact, let me see if I can pull it up here real quick.
While you're pulling that one up, Trump himself posted a meme of him and Kim Jong-un being best buddies.
Yeah, well, this one is, it says, it shows Trump shaking hands with Kim Jong-un. It says, the Republican Party, which is screaming at everyone they disagree with that they are communists, are dead silent when their leader says he loves Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, I swear. Also, when Trump is like sitting there, like every answer on why the war in Iran is happening and why he needs to attack Iran is like, well, they cannot have a nuclear weapon. And then now he's posting himself photos with someone who has nuclear weapons and has threatened to strike the United States with those nuclear weapons, and he's buddies with them.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a member of the club.
It's a pretty messed up simulation. And while you're speaking, explosions were heard in the town of Hadatha in southern Lebanon, and initial reports unconfirmed of explosions in Tartus, western Syria. I think Tartus is where the Russian base is. It's a big city, so it doesn't mean the Russian base is being attacked. But it kind of gives you an idea of the reality in the region, man. Like, how messed up is this? Like, today I really got that feeling, kind of hit me. In one day, in 1 week, the Houthis attack Saudi. People talking about, will Iran invade Kuwait? Because Iran threatened, members of parliament threatened to invade Kuwait if the US invades Iran. Reports of Iran firing missiles at the UAE, and then obviously not Iran. Israel bombing Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. All this within a week, most of it within 24 hours. It's such a mess that he's created in the region. It's pretty heartbreaking to see people's livelihood, people living in that region, get screwed like this.
Well, It's likely to get worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you still in the position that you don't think Trump, because of the munitions, etc., that we've talked a lot about, are you still in the position that you don't expect a full-blown war between the US and Iran like in February, March, or you're a bit more worried now than previously?
Okay, tell me first what you mean by full-blown war.
The level of strikes, hundreds of targets a day, like what we saw in February,
Yeah,
March.
no, they can't. They can't do that. They don't have the weapons. They'll run out.
Yeah.
So, could there be a 2 or 3 day bombardment, selective, and sort of a gesture of ill will? Sure, but every time Trump uses them, it's not like there's the Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics or Raytheon, whoever's producing what, is standing there cranking out more. They're sitting there trying to figure out how the hell are we going to get the Chinese to give us what we need, and the Chinese are saying, we're not giving it to you. The U.S. is operating on some assumptions about Iran that no longer apply. And this is particularly the case with Scott Bessent. Basically, he assumes that Iran's a closed economy, that Iran is dependent on the U.S. dollar, and the more we can cut them off from being able to make any dollars, the weaker their economy becomes, and they'll collapse. And what he's failed to take into account is that may have been the case 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when the JCPOA was signed, because you had Russia and China fully on board at the time with sanctions, both the Western sanctions and the UN sanctions. But as soon as Trump walked away from the JCPOA, that was the moment, really, that Russia and China then separated themselves. And I base that on the fact that they carried out a joint military exercise in December 2019. Okay? Go back 18 months. Because usually when you plan a joint military exercise like that, the planning for it starts minimum of 12 months out, but more likely 18 months. I did, and even though my experiences with the U.S. military, we worked with foreign militaries as well. They sort of do the same thing. 18 months out, you get your initial planning conference, and then say 12 months out, you do your mid-planning conference, and then 3 months out, you do your final planning conference, something like that. Well, this means that Russia and China, as soon as Trump walked away from the JCPOA, they said, okay, we're lining up with Iran now. That's when they began conducting these annual exercises in 2019, 2020, 2021, 22, 23, 24, 25. And then with the start of this war, the trade relations, well, actually last September in 2025, when they tried to do the snapback sanctions under JCPOA, took it to the UN, and both China, I think one of them vetoed it and one of them abstained, but they basically said, we're not going to recognize those sanctions at all as legitimate. So have a nice day.
Yeah.
So this is I think what we're seeing now is you got this open trade routes with Russia, China, and Pakistan. So here's Bessent thinking he can choke them off, and I'll just control their access to dollars. Iranians don't care about dollars; they want their assets unfrozen, but they're doing all the transactions now in Chinese currency, and they're going to get there's looking for loans through the development bank that BRICS has set up. So what this is doing is accelerating Iran's complete divorce from the Western financial system, so that in essence, U.S. loses leverage over Iran economically.
Yeah. We're talking about the trade routes between different countries in Iran. There is a report by NBC today as well, which it's perfect to get your thoughts on this. Russia's shipping drone components, ammunition, and TNT to Iran through the Caspian Sea, helping Iran replenish stockpiles depleted by the US and Israeli strikes. The Caspian route is particularly difficult for Western countries to disrupt, as the 2018 Caspian Sea Convention restricts the military presence of non-littoral states.
Non-littoral or non-literal?
Littoral, non-littoral, and I pronounced it mistakes. Non-littoral states. How significant, how important is that? How much do you think is how much do you think Russia's supporting Iran, and how big of a role are they playing in Iran's ability, not only with targeting, because I know they're using the Chinese satellite system, but just having enough missile stockpiles and the components to be able to keep manufacturing?
Well, I don't think Iran's running short of ammunition and TNT, because they weren't launching ammunition shots at incoming missiles, and TNT is used for demolition. But with regards to your question, Russia and China played an enormous role, and if nothing else, from the intelligence backup, but also other elements of military support that they provided. We go back to the helicopters Russia supplied last year. So you can't. The point of all this is Russia, China, and Iran are now united in a bloc that's really opposed to the West, and that impedes what the United States would like to do in Iran.
Yeah, I'm trying to see what else they've delivered. So I don't know why. Yeah, because you mentioned the one.
Beidou, you mean the Russians or the Chinese?
No. So I'm talking about, because they talked about TNT and ammunition. I'm seeing what they're referring to, because what would the TNT be used in? And the ammunition, the artillery, for the artillery, that don't really need that. So they did mention drones as well. So I'm sure the drones play a big role, but they haven't mentioned any other components for missiles, etc. Who do you think is supporting the Iranians more, the Russians or the Chinese, from a military perspective in terms of assets?
I think probably the Chinese, but it's not significant in terms of the difference. I think they're both equally important. If Russia's sending drones back to Iran, that's an ironic twist, because initially it was Iran sending drones to Russia, but Russia has, they have advanced several generations in, like the Garan. They're now generation 4 that's jet powered, so it can go a lot faster and a lot farther.
Well, and another thing I want to ask you about is that happened is the Turkey, the sale of the S-400s to the UAE, and to try to get the F-35s from the US. So according to Kommersant, I don't know what that outlet that is, Turkey's talks, but I've seen it on other outlets as well. Turkey's talks with the UAE on selling its S-400 air defense systems, the Russian air defense systems, have stalled, according to Russia's Kommersant, so it's Russian media, which says that the F-35 deal with the US remains suspended as a result. The report ties this to a U.S. State Department letter sent to Congress on July 22, recommending against approval. So we know that the Americans won't approve the sale of the F-35s to Turkey, which you've criticized already. You're like, even if these F-35s are delivered, you've called them, your words, pieces of junk. But to be able to get those pieces of junk, the S-400s, the Turks have to get rid of the S-400s. And I'm not sure why the discussions have stalled, considering that the Emiratis do need air defense systems. So I'm not sure whether this is Israeli pressure, because the Israelis don't want the F-35s to be delivered to Turkey. They've been very vocal about it. So I don't know if the Israelis are pressuring the Emiratis not to take the S-400s from the Turks, so the Turks don't get the F-35s from the Americans. But there is a pretty big power struggle between the Turks and Israelis. They've been talked about for a while. Now, you've always made a point, whenever we spoke about this, about the amount of money the Turks are making from the oil that's coming out of Azerbaijan through Turkey being sent to Israel. So they do a lot of commerce together. But we are seeing now, other than the rhetoric, we're seeing action as well, like the F-35s by Trump, and the disagreements that Congress is having about this and whether they're going to approve it or not. The strikes by Israel in Syria is probably the most significant development, at least in the last couple of years, between the two countries. Would you reconsider the likelihood, or how concerned you are about likelihood of a conflict between those two countries, or you're still not worried at all about it?
Between which two countries?
Turkey, Israel.
No. I think what we started off talking about tonight was Israel's bombing a base where there may be Turkish troops, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think the chance of them getting into that show up on my screen is that's more likely than less likely.
Yeah, because it's because the point you make about the trade between the two countries has always, trade is generally a good incentive for countries to avoid clashing, but it's not a guarantee, as we've seen, the last forever.
Right.
And countries that do a lot of trade end up fighting. So yeah, this is the problem. There is that vacuum being left by the US. So yeah, it's just insane that we're even talking about this. Yeah, I don't know how that will look like.
It's one big food fight over there right now. Yeah. And the one country that stayed out of the food fights, sort of, is Jordan. Sure. I'm just saying, next one up, maybe Jordan. We'll be talking Jordan here in a couple of weeks.
What did your contact say about Jordan?
Just watch out. That it's next. So I thought, well, he's been pretty good. He said, quote, "I told you about Yemen," and he did. I mean, 2 weeks before all this stuff to start off with the Saudis and such, he said, "Keep your eye on Yemen. There's more coming." And so he's now said, "Hey, I told you about Yemen. Now watch Jordan."